Why you obsess over everything. Your mind was never meant to rest in peace. The moment one problem disappears, another takes its place. A text message gets ignored, and suddenly you replay every word you said. One awkward interaction becomes an all-night investigation inside your head. You wonder if people secretly dislike you, if you said too much, if you should have stayed quiet, if one mistake ruined everything. Even when nothing is technically wrong, your brain keeps searching for something to fix. You tell yourself to stop overthinking, but your thoughts don't listen. They move in circles. One worry creates another. One possibility becomes 10 worst-case scenarios. The harder you try to quiet your mind, the louder it becomes. Obsessing doesn't happen because you are weak or dramatic. It happens because your brain believes constant thinking will somehow protect you from pain, rejection, failure, embarrassment, or regret. Your mind treats uncertainty like danger, so it keeps working overtime trying to solve problems that may not even exist yet. But over time, the obsession stops feeling protective. Instead of giving you control, it drains your energy. Instead of helping you feel safe, it keeps you trapped in fear. You become mentally exhausted from carrying thoughts that never seem to end. And eventually, you realize the real problem is not the situations themselves. The real problem is that your mind has learned to treat every uncertainty as an emergency. Your brain confuses thinking with control. Obsessive thinking creates the illusion of control. When life feels uncertain, your brain starts analyzing every detail because it believes there must be an answer hidden somewhere. The mind assumes that if it thinks long enough, deeply enough, or carefully enough, it can prevent bad outcomes from happening. So you replay conversations repeatedly. You search for hidden meanings in people's words. You study facial expressions, tone changes, delayed responses, and tiny details that most people would forget within minutes. Your brain convinces you that every unanswered question must have a solution if you just think harder. But uncertainty is uncomfortable for the human mind. The brain naturally wants closure. It wants guarantees. It wants reassurance that everything will be okay. When those guarantees do not exist, obsessive thinking steps in as an attempt to reduce anxiety. Obsession often behaves like the One Ring in the Lord of the Rings. At first, it feels useful. It promises control, certainty, and protection. But the longer you carry it, the more it demands your attention. Eventually, you stop carrying the obsession, and the obsession starts carrying you. Like the ring, the very thing that seems to offer power slowly consumes your energy, narrows your world, and becomes harder to let go of. The problem is that thinking and control are not the same thing. You can spend hours analyzing a situation and still have no control over the outcome. You cannot control how people feel about you. You cannot control every mistake, misunderstanding, or disappointment. You cannot predict the future perfectly, no matter how many scenarios you imagine. Yet the mind keeps trying because uncertainty feels unbearable. This is why obsessive thinkers often struggle to relax. Relaxing requires accepting that not everything can be solved immediately. It requires tolerating unanswered questions without mentally chasing them all night. For someone who overthinks constantly, that feels terrifying because the brain mistakes uncertainty for danger. Ironically, the more control you seek through overthinking, the more powerless you feel. Endless analysis does not create peace. It creates mental exhaustion. Your thoughts become so loud that you lose the ability to trust yourself naturally. Decisions become harder. Small situations feel overwhelming. Even simple interactions start carrying emotional weight they were never meant to have. At some point, the brain stops thinking to solve problems and starts thinking simply because it is addicted to searching for certainty. And certainty is something life rarely gives completely. The truth is that peace does not come from controlling everything. Peace comes from accepting that some uncertainty will always exist and learning that you can survive in it anyway. Anxiety feeds the obsession loop. Anxiety does not just create fear, it creates repetition. When someone struggles with anxiety, the brain becomes hyper aware of potential danger. It constantly scans situations looking for signs of rejection, embarrassment, conflict, failure, or loss. Once the brain identifies something emotionally important, it refuses to let it go. Every thought begins to feel urgent. A simple mistake suddenly feels catastrophic. A delayed reply feels personal. A small disagreement feels like the beginning of abandonment. The anxious brain magnifies uncertainty until ordinary situations start feeling emotionally threatening. This creates the obsession loop. First, you feel anxious about something. Then, your brain tries to reduce the anxiety by overanalyzing the situation. You replay events repeatedly, hoping to find reassurance of certainty. For a brief moment, the analysis gives temporary relief because it feels like you are doing something. But the relief never lasts. Soon after, doubt appears. Another possibility enters your mind. Another fear demands attention. And because your brain has learned that obsessing temporarily reduces anxiety, it keeps returning to the same mental behavior repeatedly. The cycle becomes automatic. You worry, you overthink, you feel temporary relief. Then the anxiety returns stronger. Obsessive thinking often resembles the punishment of Sisyphus. You push the same thoughts uphill, searching for certainty, only to watch them roll back down and begin again. No matter how much effort you invest, the mind never reaches the lasting certainty it promised. And over time, this trains your brain to become dependent on obsessive thinking. Your mind starts believing that if you stop analyzing, something bad will happen. Thinking becomes a coping mechanism even when it hurts you. This is why anxious people often feel mentally exhausted all the time. Their minds rarely rest. Even during calm moments, their thoughts continue searching for the next possible threat. It becomes difficult to fully enjoy anything because part of the brain is always preparing for disaster. The cruel part is that most of the imagined disasters never happen, but the emotional stress caused by anticipating them is still real. Anxiety makes hypothetical problems feel emotionally immediate. Living this way can make someone feel trapped inside their own head. They know they are overthinking, but stopping feels impossible because the brain treats overthinking as protection. But awareness matters. Once you understand that anxiety feeds obsessive thinking, you can begin separating real problems from imagined emergencies. Not every fear deserves your attention. Not every thought deserves investigation. And not every uncomfortable feeling means danger is present. Sometimes anxiety is simply a false alarm that your brain has repeated for too long. You attach your worth to outcomes. Many people obsess because they unconsciously tie their self-worth to outcomes. If someone rejects them, they feel unworthy. If they fail, they feel inadequate. If they disappoint someone, they feel ashamed. If they are misunderstood, they feel exposed. The situation itself becomes bigger than it actually is because it feels connected to personal value. Instead of seeing mistakes or setbacks as normal human experiences, the brain interprets them as evidence of personal failure. This creates enormous emotional pressure. Every conversation matters too much. Every decision feels permanent. Every interaction becomes emotionally loaded. When self-worth depends on outcomes, letting things go becomes almost impossible because the brain believes every result says something important about who you are. For example, someone who strongly ties their worth to approval may obsess for days over a short, awkward interaction, not because the moment itself was catastrophic, but because their mind interprets social discomfort as proof that they are unlikable or flawed. The same thing happens with achievement. A person may obsess over mistakes because they believe failure threatens their identity. If they are not successful, intelligent, attractive, productive, or admired, they fear they lose value as a person. This mindset creates constant internal tension. Life begins to feel like one endless test where every outcome determines whether you are enough. But self-worth was never supposed to depend on perfection. Human beings are not machines designed to perform flawlessly at all times. Rejection happens. Misunderstandings happen. Failure happens. These experiences are part of being alive, not proof of inadequacy. The problem is that obsessive thinkers personalize everything. They internalize every negative experience and turn it into a reflection of themselves. Instead of saying, that situation went badly, they say, I am bad. And once your identity becomes attached to outcomes, your brain becomes terrified of mistakes. That fear fuels more obsession because overthinking feels like a way to avoid emotional pain. But no amount of mental analysis can guarantee perfect outcomes. Eventually, healing requires separating your value from your performance. Your worth cannot depend on every conversation going perfectly or every person approving of you. You are still valuable even when things go wrong. Perfectionism makes you mentally exhausted. Perfectionism is obsession disguised as responsibility. On the surface, perfectionism often looks productive. People praise perfectionists for being careful, hardworking, organized, or detail-oriented. But internally, perfectionism is usually driven by fear of mistakes, criticism, embarrassment, or failure. The perfectionist mind believes that if everything is done perfectly, pain can be avoided. So you reread messages repeatedly before sending them. You replay old conversations, searching for the right thing you should have said. You delay decisions because you fear making the wrong choice. You spend enormous mental energy trying to eliminate every possible mistake before taking action. Like Hamlet, the overthinking mind can become trapped in analysis. The search for the perfect decision becomes so consuming that action itself feels impossible. But perfectionism does not create peace. It creates paralysis. Because perfection is impossible, the mind never fully relaxes. There is always one more thing to improve, one more possibility to consider, one more flaw to fix. The goalpost constantly moves further away. This creates chronic mental exhaustion. Perfectionists often struggle with self-compassion because their internal standards are impossibly high. They judge themselves harshly for normal human behavior. Small mistakes feel enormous because perfectionism magnifies imperfections into evidence of failure. Over time, the mindset becomes emotionally draining. Even success does not feel satisfying because perfectionists focus more on what went wrong than what went right. Nothing ever feels fully complete or fully good enough. Perfectionism also damages spontaneity. Life becomes overly controlled because the person fears uncertainty and imperfection. They become hesitant to speak freely, take risks, or be vulnerable because they are constantly trying to manage how they are perceived. But human connection does not come from perfection. It comes from authenticity. People do not bond over flawless performances. They bond through honesty, vulnerability, and humanity. The perfectionist mind struggles to understand this because it believes worth must be earned through flawless behavior. But eventually, perfectionism becomes unsustainable. The mental pressure becomes too heavy to carry forever. Healing begins when you realize that mistakes do not make you unworthy. Imperfection is not failure. It is part of being human. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is allow yourself to be unfinished, uncertain, and imperfect without treating it like a personal crisis. Unresolved emotions keep returning. Obsessions are often emotions looking for closure. Sometimes the mind keeps revisiting situations not because they are important in the present, but because the emotions connected to them were never fully processed. Pain that was ignored does not disappear. Fear that was buried does not vanish. Anger that was suppressed eventually finds another way to surface. The brain keeps returning to unresolved experiences, hoping to finally make sense of them. This is why people replay old memories repeatedly. They are not only searching for answers, they are searching for emotional resolution. They hope that if they think deeply enough, they will eventually find peace. But intellectual analysis cannot fully heal emotional wounds. You cannot think your way out of grief. You cannot analyze your way out of heartbreak. You cannot logically erase pain that was never emotionally processed. Many obsessive thinkers struggle because they try to solve emotions like math problems. They search for perfect explanations instead of allowing themselves to actually feel what they feel. But emotions do not disappear simply because they are ignored or overanalyzed. In fact, avoidance often strengthens them. A person who never processed rejection may obsess over future relationships because old fears remain unresolved. Someone who never dealt with childhood criticism may constantly overthink mistakes because old emotional wounds still shape their self-image. The mind keeps revisiting emotional pain because it wants safety, understanding, or closure. But closure does not always come through more thinking. Sometimes it comes through acceptance. Sometimes healing means admitting, that hurt me, that mattered to me. I cannot change what happened. I need to let this exist without endlessly fighting it. This is difficult because obsessive thinkers often fear emotions. They feel safer analyzing feelings than actually experiencing them. But avoiding emotions only keeps them trapped beneath the surface. Eventually, true healing requires emotional honesty. Not every thought needs solving. Some emotions simply need to be felt, acknowledged, and released. Obsessing becomes part of your identity. After years of overthinking, obsession can begin to feel like part of your personality. You become the anxious one, the overthinker, the deep thinker, the person who cares too much. At first, these labels may seem harmless, but over time, they shape how you see yourself. You begin to believe that constant mental struggle is simply who you are, and that belief makes changes harder. When obsessive thinking becomes tied to identity, letting go almost feels dangerous. You fear becoming careless if you stop overanalyzing. You fear losing control. You fear that relaxing means something important will fall apart. So even when the obsession hurts you, part of you still clings to it because it feels familiar. Human beings are deeply attached to familiarity, even when it causes suffering. The brain often prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace because uncertainty feels threatening. This is why some people feel uncomfortable during calm moments. Silence feels strange. Rest feels undeserved. Peace feels temporary. The nervous system becomes so used to stress that calmness almost feels unsafe. But suffering is not proof of depth. You don't need to mentally torture yourself to prove that you care. Constant worry does not make you more responsible, more intelligent, or more loving. It only keeps your nervous system trapped in survival mode. Real peace is not irresponsibility. Calmness is not weakness. Letting go does not mean you suddenly stop caring about life. It simply means you stop carrying every thought as though it is a life or death emergency. You are allowed to exist without constantly monitoring yourself. You are allowed to make mistakes without collapsing emotionally. You are allowed to rest without guilt. Your identity is bigger than your anxiety. And the moment you stop treating overthinking as part of who you are, you create space for a different kind of life, one built on presence instead of fear. Conclusion. Obsessing over everything is exhausting because your mind treats every uncertainty like a problem that must be solved immediately. Every unanswered question feels urgent. Every mistake feels dangerous. Every possibility feels emotionally loaded. But not every thought deserves your attention. Not every fear deserves investigation. And not every outcome can be controlled. The mind often believes that overthinking is protection, but most of the time it only creates more suffering. It steals peace from the present moment and replaces it with endless mental noise. At some point, healing requires learning to stop negotiating with every fearful thought that enters your mind. It requires trusting yourself enough to survive uncertainty without constantly trying to outthink it. You will never think your way into complete safety. Life will always contain risk, discomfort, rejection, and unpredictability. But that does not mean you are powerless. The goal is not to become someone who never cares. The goal is to become someone who can care deeply without being consumed by every thought, every fear, and every possible outcome. Because peace does not come from controlling life perfectly. It comes from finally realizing you do not have to carry the weight of every thought your mind creates.